Ken, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me on or back on, I guess.
Yeah, there's been quite a history with this episode, and thank you so much for doing this despite me losing the last interview. And so we'll directly begin with your journey. You don't need any introduction. We all know what your data journey has been like. But I'm specifically interested, how did you decide to get into sports analytics? Because when you look at data science as a domain, you know that it is a very extensive domain, and especially when people are trying to break into this field, it's very difficult to narrow it down on a specific aspect, on the kind of roles that they should be looking at. So how did you decide that sports analytics was the thing for you?
You know, it's funny. Sports analytics for me just seemed like the natural progression of what I was doing already. And I think a lot of people don't look at where they are currently and just try and think about what the natural next step is for them in their career, their interests, or what they should be pursuing. So a little bit more background. So I have always loved sports. I've always played them at a competitive level, and some would say like a fairly high competitive level. So in high school and in college, I played golf. I tried to play golf professionally after that. And to me, I was like, oh my goodness, I'd like to do something with golf. I wasn't good enough to continue to keep playing and earn a living that way. So what should I do next? And one of the things that made me at least somewhat successful in the golf domain is that I started in college evaluating my game from a quantitative perspective. So I studied economics in college, and something that I realized is if I looked at my performance over time, if I looked at the marginal return I could get by practicing the different areas of my game, I could improve as fast as I possibly could compared to my peers. Some of them were significantly more talented than me, but I could use the analytics, I could use the data, I could use the statistics to help me improve as much as I could and maximize my own capabilities. So to me, I was like, wow, I've been doing data related to golf for a long period of time. I'm really interested in this. I love golf and I know more about it from a subject area expertise perspective. Maybe if I combine these two, I could create some additional value either for myself or for individual golfers or for teams or whoever that might be. So after I'd been playing for a long time, I started getting interested in daily fantasy sports, where you're choosing golfers or athletes each week and you're creating a fantasy team and having them play. And that's a highly quantitative discipline, right? And so I went from understanding my own performance to trying to predict performance of other people. And once you get into that realm, that's when it truly becomes not just descriptive statistics, but more data sciencey and model building and those types of things. So I just started to build these prerequisite skills because I was interested in that. And then I looked back and said, oh, I have this really cool skill set. I can start driving value for other people within this space. And, it sounds like, it's not like I had this all planned. It's that I just kept following the things that I was interested in and the aptitudes that I was building around those to eventually find myself in a career. And I don't think that story is unique to me, right? Yeah. If someone's really interested in a specific domain, in the world we live in today, you can create a living with data in almost any domain. Like, let's take video games, right? I mean, you're going to tell me that with the amount of data that is collected on each individual, even individual game level, not just all the games, that there isn't going to be some applications of data and understanding the users and whatever that might be, right? So to me, at least that introspective part and looking at, hey, these are the things I'm interested in, and then the secondary skill set is the key to finding what you're interested in or what could be viable careers for you.
Right. So looking at your journey, it was quite an unconventional road to breaking into data science. And today, given the amount of options that we have, the amount of courses that we have, and no one knows how to decide, how would you suggest that people find the specific domain that they're interested in, apart from pivoting on the past experience?
So I think experimentation is very, very important, right? I wouldn't know that I like data if I didn't try it out with my golf game, right? I wouldn't know that I needed new additional tools if I didn't start poking around and probing these different problems and realize that, oh, I ran into a wall. I don't have the technical skills. I have to go out and get these. I mean, that's a problem I ran into a lot, excuse me, is that I wanted to build a model to predict golf outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And I was doing this in Excel. I knew basic, like linear regression. I didn't know much beyond that. And then I realized, wow, I need more advanced models to be able to, or I should try more advanced models to be able to predict these outcomes. And then I said, oh, in order to build these advanced models, I can't really do them in Excel. I need to go beyond that. So I started tinkering around with R. And I said, well, R is going to be useful to me in like a statistics perspective, but there are some of these other things that I want to implement, whether it's making a dashboard or whatever. I guess you can make pretty nice dashboards in R as well. But then I was like, okay, Python makes sense for me for this specific use case. So I'm going to go down and learn that. And so it's sort of this greedy algorithm that you have in the approach to your career is you start trying to figure out problems and you run into obstacles, and then you learn things to help you get past those obstacles. And that's a lot more of a clear path of learning than it is to say, hey, I'm going to learn all of these different things, then try to apply them, right? The feature space, when you're using this sort of greedy algorithm of all the different types of things you can learn, shrinks down to what's relevant to that problem.
Yeah.
And I think that cuts through a lot of the noise. It cuts through a lot of the overwhelming nature of having to like learn a big domain like this, right? Like if I was knocking at the doorstep for all of data science every day when I was learning, I would be completely overwhelmed and just I'd panic, right? Because there's so many different things. If I started with just like one door and it opened a room, and then I go to another door and it opens a room, like rather than looking at this whole building from the outside in, we're looking at it in a room by room. This is a very interesting analogy I've just created, but that's less intimidating, right?
Yeah.
And you can sort of choose like, okay, if there's a bunch of doors in a different room, you can say, oh, I like how that door looks, I'm going to go after this one. Maybe you're not interested and you can back out and choose another door. But it just cuts through so much of the noise and the fear and the apprehension if you're following what might seem interesting to you,
or what the trend is. Yeah, which is what people are usually doing these days. But you bring up a very interesting analogy. I think it's also very similar to the GPS approach, right? As long as you know the destination, you're figuring out where the next road is that doesn't have a lot of traffic, and you go from there. So you just build your path like that. And that sounds interesting. But what I specifically want to understand is, because you manage so many things at once, you have your job, and you have your content creation, you have your courses. So how do you manage your time, and what does a day in your life look like? Very interested to know that.
Yeah, well, let's get to that. I do want to touch on the GPS analogy. I think something that so many people really struggle with is finding out what they want their destination to be.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't even know what my destination is in the complete long term. Right. But on the other side of that, there are people that think that the destination is landing a data science job, for example.
Yeah.
And once you reach that destination, you're like, oh, that was it. And so there's this really big problem, I think, with goal setting to a certain extent, where it's like, hey, if we keep setting goals that are too concrete and that aren't outrageous enough, we're going to meet them and we're going to be disappointed, or we're going to have to reassess and create other goals. I think learning is a very similar way. Is if your broader goal is to like enjoy learning this field, have a successful career. I mean, yes, it is vague. You can set signposts that are very specific along the way that make sense. So like a signpost that might mean that you're on your way to having a successful career, happiness, or whatever it is associated with data science, is that you land a job. That's fine. But a lot of people get so wrapped up in the goal itself of landing a job that afterwards they're completely disappointed in the decisions they've made, and they don't, I just wanted to clarify that, because I think a lot of the times, even myself, I say, wow, like I wanted, let's say, like I wanted to make this course and I was so excited about it. And then after I finished, I was like, oh my goodness, I feel so empty because I have nothing, like I reached my goal, and you're like, yes, it was great, but like there's, it doesn't feel like I it's still like on this trajectory, this upper trajectory that I created. In terms of doing so much and like trying to manage my life, I'll be the first to tell you, like, I'm not the best at it. Things fall through the cracks. Like there's there's challenges with staying on top of everything. There's challenges with motivation even sometimes, right? And I think the best thing that I would recommend for everyone, especially early on their career, is to focus on a few things at a time. So like, if you can, dedicate weeks or months to a specific project. Not easy for everyone, not possible for everyone. But if you can't do that, then dedicate weeks at a time to things, or dedicate days at a time to things, or chunk your days into specific blocks and only focus on one thing in each one of those blocks. Multitasking is one of the things that detracts the most from productivity, from success, for me, even from happiness. And I think that the best way to do that is to set very clear schedules for yourself, design your environment so that you can isolate and focus at one thing. And, very recently, I've taken on way more than I can handle. And I'm realizing like my goal for this year is to figure out how to systematize things, how to make it so that I can focus on as few things as possible, as often as possible. And find happiness, find enjoyment of those things. Because I know my mental health really suffers if I'm working on too many things and I feel like I'm being pulled in multiple different directions. And that's something that is a constant battle, a constant struggle, but it's something that we can work on every day and get better at every day. Because it's really hard, like early in your career, like where I am right now, which is like early mid-career as I look at it, I have so many really cool opportunities, right? Things that I want to do, things that, wow, if I don't do this now, I might never get the chance to do it. But if I want to do any of these things well, I'm going to have to let some of them slip through the cracks. I'm not going to be able to do all of them unless I really compromise my health or something else that's really important. And that would compromise my happiness over the long term. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, a lot more positive things happen from doing one or two things really well than doing a bunch of things in a sort of half-ass way. And so the best thing I could tell anyone, and I have to tell myself this advice too, is to just focus on a couple things and really, really execute them well.
Yeah, I think the art of saying no is also something that we all have to learn, because there's the fear of missing out, but I want to take it to the joy of missing out, where it's okay to miss out on a few opportunities. And I can completely understand where you're coming from, because I also got to a point where resting was where I felt guilty. Every time I rested, I felt guilty that I was not doing something productive. So I had to work on it.
Yeah. Well, like it's interesting how you frame resting. So I look at some forms of rest, like high quality leisure time. So whether I'm outside, whether I'm spending it with people that I care about, if I'm exercising, if I'm even taking a nap, if I'm meditating, those are all really positive forms of rest because I'm using them to I'm using them to recharge, right?
Yeah.
I feel very guilty if I'm on Instagram, if I'm watching like a Netflix show or something like that. I have a lot of trouble sitting down and watching TV now. I just feel like I should be doing something else. Wow. I feel like I'm better off doing something else. But on the other hand, those other types of rest, I find that, through experimentation, just like we were talking about before, that those give me a lot more energy to do the things that I genuinely care about. I also do this exercise every day where I ask myself how I would live the day if I was looking back from like a deathbed when I'm old, right? And something that keeps coming up is that, like, would I want to be, am I going to remember like seeing a meme on Instagram? Am I going to remember like even a show that I watched? Like on my deathbed, am I going to be thinking about like, oh, Game of Thrones was so sick? Like, I don't think that that's the case, right? I'm going to be thinking about, wow, like this story that my parents told me about our family history was incredible. Like that was a meaningful thing in the day-to-day. Or I was able to like push myself. I've been training jujitsu recently. I was able to push myself and do something I hadn't done before there, and that was meaningful. It's just interesting to think about those things, and I find education unbelievably meaningful, right? I was able to either teach through YouTube or some of these other platforms, or I was able to learn something that pays like returns over time, whereas and you know, like getting closer with your family or your significant other, those pay returns over time, whereas you know, like shows and scrolling, some of these behaviors are instantaneous gratification but pay zero returns. So looking back from my deathbed, I'm like, okay, I want to do things that make my life better over the course of my entire future till I get to that deathbed point, rather than just make me feel good in the moment. And it's fine to do things that make you feel good in the moment. I think food for me is something I get immense joy in. But I also reminisce and think about, oh, wow, this meal was really good. I want to try and make this in the future or do things like that. Um, so I'm not saying completely absolve yourself from immediate gratification,
Yeah.
but it's cool to think about, hey, is what I'm doing right now going to be valuable to me as I progress? Or is it just going to be valuable to me in the moment and I'll never think about it again? You know, I got that little dopamine hit and it just ended there.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, but do you think that you're overthinking rest? Because rest is it's subjective, right? You can do anything that makes you happy at that moment, and it does not need to have an outcome. Do you think you're overthinking it?
I think that I absolutely could be. I
Yeah.
found that when, well, from a science perspective, there are types of rest that are more restful,
Yeah.
right? That recharge you more effectively. Like meditation, there's all these different types of non-sleep deep rest, mantra, tumo breathing that actually recharge you. And social media is the opposite, where your brain is active but your body is at rest, and so you're burning mental energy. And so I think, yes, in some sense there are quantitatively things that are better for you when you take time, and when you don't, that'll make you better in the future. um but you know, I am not someone that is like live your life to a specific to you. Like I waste a lot of time, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
it's a continual progression for me to try to get to a point where the rest and the things that I observe are what I feel is the best for me in my life going forward. And it's a slow and like hopefully steady progression. Some days are better, some days are worse. But I also think it's kind of fun to think in depth about these things, like something as simple as rest, right? Where it's like subjective to the individual person as well. It can be so nuanced, right? There's so many different types of rest. There, like that for me, digging into those questions about myself and understanding is always very fun.
That would be a fun data science question to explore.
Yes.
Yeah, but I understand because I just wanted to get that point across in the hustle culture that we live in, where people in their 20s are feeling like their life is ended. So I just want to get this point across that people can do anything they want during their rest time, and it's difficult to find the right balance, but we are on a journey to find that. So
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest things is just being mindful and like
yeah,
evaluating why you're doing things, right? Like if I wanted to take an hour to play video games or something, fine, but like keep it to an hour,
yeah,
right? Or like even if I wanted to spend a whole day doing that, just know that I'm going to do it for that day. I'm going to schedule it. I'm going to bake it into what I'm doing.
mm,
And as long as I'm mindful of it and I have control over it, then it's fine. If things get away from me, like I sit down, I scroll Instagram, and I look up 3 hours later, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like I just wasted the whole day. That's when it becomes a problem.
yeah, absolutely.
And that's
I
yeah.
think
I actually yeah I hate the hustle culture idea where it's like work work work.
exactly.
I I love the idea of like for me all the stuff that I'm doing, it doesn't really feel like work, and so I have a tremendous appetite to do it a lot of the time.
Mm,
Um, and you know, the leisure types of things that I do, I don't get as much, or that I used to do. Let's say I would binge a Netflix series or something. I just don't get the same enjoyment out of doing that as I do with a lot of the projects I'm working on,
yeah,
because the things that I'm working on, I feel purpose for, I feel like meaning associated with them, and they also stimulate me like mentally in ways that just get me really excited. Um, and you know, I can't remember in the last like 5 years when I've been like, wow, like this show got me like I got to think, right? Like thinking has become so fun for me. Whereas observing and just taking something in is less exciting than it used to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's yeah, setting boundaries and then trying to find the balance, something that we're all trying. So coming back to what this podcast was about, breaking into data science, let's say someone has decided the specific domain or the kind of job roles that they want to target. How would you suggest that they try and find the job roles? And what I'm specifically getting around is building a personal brand as a data scientist so that you can attract more interviews rather than you having to send your resumes to 100 places and then just waiting blindly for things to magically come to you.
Yeah, so I actually made a full video on this that came out just
I'll
last
link
week,
in
which
the below.
perfect. But I think that so many people approach the data science job search in the complete wrong way, right? We're creating this system first where we're doing all the outreach and we don't have people reaching out to us.
Yeah.
Right? If someone is reaching out to us, they want to talk with us, therefore we're probably going to have a higher chance of getting through the next approximate rounds of the interview because they're making the initiation, right? So we should be doing everything that we can to get recruiters, to get managers, to get referrals, whatever it is, get the flow of resources or the flow of interest coming towards us. And we can do that by creating a portfolio. We can do that by networking. And networking doesn't have to be person to person. It can be through the portfolio creation or sharing your work or blogs or whatever it might be, right? And through reaching out in effective ways. So, you know, part of building a network isn't about just creating individual opportunities or individual connections that can help you. It's creating a large group of connections that all have a small percent probability of creating value for you. So if you're creating this network with the idea that, hey, I want something from this network and it's going to be very concrete, that is not how it works. The idea is that you're creating this network and you're meeting with people and you're creating value for them, and the whole thing, this giant critical mass network that you're creating, is going to be inconsistently or like periodically sending opportunities your way. So it's not this one-to-one relationship with opportunity that you're creating. You're creating a one-to-many relationship with a lot of randomness sprinkled in. And I think that that's really hard for people to grasp, is they want something immediately from another person. And if you are going in with that approach, you're never going to have any success. Or like people, you know, it'll be very transactional, right? And I don't think anyone wants pure transactional relationships. Those are not the ones that pay dividends down the road, right?
Yeah, no one has time for that in today's
exactly. And you know, like the people that do have time for that, they probably aren't quite as influential in the space that, or like in the job market or whatever it is, that they'd be able to help you as much as possible. Aside from that, I also think the other way that people are looking at the data science job process wrong is they're not treating it like a data problem, right? They think that, hey, I'm going to send out a bunch of resumes, or they're thinking about it as a way too simplistic data job problem, right? Where it's like, oh, there's some percent that I get a call back, and I'm going to send out 100 resumes. If I get a call back 3% of the time, great. I mean, like, that's way overly simplistic. There's so many other variables that make you desirable in a job market that we need to be collecting data. We need to be analyzing what types of positions are relevant. We need to be looking at what types of skills are relevant for the positions and the level that I'm at. And all of those are data related. You know, you can scrape a bunch of job postings. You can A/B test different ways of reaching out to recruiters. There's so many quantitative things that you can do to understand how you match up to the competition, where you stand, what your probability is of getting any individual job, that it blows my mind that all these people want to be data scientists and they're not approaching this in a data oriented way. The last thing I think that people don't understand is the nature of interviewing in general. And so the biggest thing for me is that it is not an aggregate, like a law of averages equation, right? If on average, I am the 20th best candidate in every interview, or let's say no averages, like in every interview, I'm the 20th best candidate out of 100, right? That's pretty good. That's the 80th percentile. But I'll probably never land a job if I'm just good or very good in every interview. I have to be either great, and if I'm not great, who cares? Right?
Yeah.
It's a maximization problem in each individual interview. Like, I want to be the best, I have to do everything I can to be the best in each individual interview rather than just being good on the whole. And so we can be the best in each individual interview if we're really paying attention to the company, we're knowing what they do for to make money, if we have a strong portfolio that's relevant to the company, if we can specialize and like kind of niche down with what the companies are requiring or asking for. And I think a lot of people don't want to go through that extra effort,
Yeah.
but they're also not going to get as many opportunities as they might. And that comes down to this conversation we had before with specialization, right? And for me, I think it's really important to niche down when you're trying to land a specific role, because while, yes, you're probably not going to be as desirable to every single company, no, and you still have a specialized set of skills, so you're going to be more interesting to a specific subgroup of companies. But if you really think about it, it's like all these candidates have this very generalist portfolio. Are you going to look worse to a generalist company if you have a portfolio that's very specific to certain things? I don't think that's the case. I think you still look just about as good in all these other interviews, but in the ones where you're really niched down and specific, you're going to look incredible compared to other candidates. So a lot of that is introspection. A lot of that is saying, hey, like, what is the true downside of what I'm doing and what is the upside? And in my mind, like, those three things that I described,
Yeah.
produce almost unlimited upside in this job search process.
Yeah, I like the idea of using data science to break into data science and actually land the job. But then you talked about portfolio being, maybe customizing your portfolio to make it relevant to that company. So, in terms of portfolio design, what would your advice be for people who are new to this field in general?